Welcome back to the deep dive. I want you to close your eyes for a second. Well, actually, unless you're driving.
Yeah, please keep your eyes on the road.
Right, please do. But mentally, I want you to go back to high school. Think about your old schedule.
Oh, man. The heavy backpacks.
Exactly. You had history, math, maybe chemistry, a foreign language. Now, be honest here. How many of those were just boxes you had to check so you could graduate?
For most of us. I mean, probably all of them. You memorize the date of the battle, you pass the test, and then you completely forget the date of the battle.
Endless cycle of academic life.
Right. You just dump the information the second the exam is over.
But occasionally, and I admit this is rare, you stumble across something that stops feeling like a class and starts feeling like, I don't know, something else, something vital.
A shift in perspective.
Yes, and that specific shift is what we are looking at today. We are doing a deep dive into a personal reflection titled The Linguistic Key to a Global Future.
And on the surface, sure, this is a piece about learning English. But I want to be really clear right off the bat. If you think we're just going to talk about vocabulary lists and verb tenses,
You are going to be very surprised.
you really are. Because this is actually a fascinating case study on mindset. It is about the fundamental difference between passive education and active acquisition.
It's a pretty short piece overall, but it really packs a punch, mostly because of one specific distinction the author makes right at the beginning. They explicitly refuse to call English a subject. They call it a tool.
Which is a huge distinction.
It is, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. Is that just semantics? I mean, is calling it a tool just a fancy, productive-sounding way of making homework seem more exciting?
It sounds like a corporate buzzword, I know,
Hmm.
but functionally, it's a massive shift in how you approach learning. Think about it this way. A subject is something you study, essentially, to please someone else.
Like a teacher.
A teacher, a parent, a college admissions board. You hold on to the knowledge just long enough to be validated by them.
Okay, so a subject is inherently performative.
Exactly. You perform, you get the grade, you move on. But a tool is something you pick up because you have a job to do.
Right.
You don't study a hammer just for the sake of knowing about hammers. You study it because you literally need to drive a nail into a piece of wood.
That makes a lot of sense.
So the author is arguing that they aren't learning English to get an A on a report card. They are learning it because they are trying to build a very specific kind of life.
And that construction project, the life they are building, that is what takes up the bulk of this deep dive. The author claims this tool allows them to connect with the world in a powerful and meaningful way.
Which is a very broad statement.
It sounds great on a bumper sticker,
Yeah.
but what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, the author breaks this down into 3 distinct tiers of connection. And I think it's worth going through them one by one because they really escalate in importance.
Okay, let's unpack that.
The first one is probably the most obvious, interpersonal connection. Just communicating with people from different countries.
Sure, the ability to travel without holding your phone up and using Google Translate every 5 seconds.
It is that, absolutely. But it's also about the quality of the interaction itself. There is a huge difference between politely ordering a coffee in a foreign language and actually having a real spontaneous conversation with the barista about their day.
The author specifically mentions breaking down barriers.
Right. Because when you speak the language, you stop being just an observer or a tourist. You start being an active participant.
That completely makes sense. But then they move to the second tier, which I actually found a bit more profound, understanding new cultures. The text says language allows them to understand deeper values and traditions.
This is where that tool analogy really starts to hold its weight. Language is essentially the operating system of a culture.
I love that phrasing, the operating system.
It is. You can't really run the software of a culture. Its humor, its idioms, its deep-seated values, if you don't have the underlying operating system installed.
Because if you rely on translations,
You are always getting a filtered version of reality. You are seeing the culture through the translator's lens, not your own. And the author clearly wants direct, unfiltered access.
and speaking of direct access, this brings us to the third tier. And honestly, I think this is the strongest point in the entire source material. The author states that English allows them to access Unlimited knowledge.
Unlimited knowledge. It's a bold claim.
Very bold. I was actually thinking about this beforehand. We all have the internet, right? We all have access to the exact same websites, the same search engines. So why does this specific language matter quite so much?
Well, you have to think about the sheer volume of information that exists solely or originally in English.
Hmm.
Scientific research papers, global news, coding languages, international business documentation, even a huge chunk of global entertainment. If you are locked out of that specific language, you are living in a much, much smaller information ecosystem.
It's kind of like standing in front of the Library of Alexandria, but the front door is dead bolted.
Precisely. You know all those books are in there, but you can't read a single page. And the author views English as the literal key to that deadbolt. This is where the subject versus tool distinction becomes very tangible.
Because if English is the subject, you just learn it to pass the exam.
But if it's a tool, you learn it so you can read a cutting-edge medical journal, or watch a complex tutorial on software engineering, or understand a geopolitical crisis by reading multiple different global sources.
It turns the learner into a global citizen just by granting them access to the global archives.
Exactly. The motivation shifts completely from external pressure to internal desire. And that internal drive is the engine of all successful learning.
So that covers the input side of things,
Yeah.
what the author gets from the world. But halfway through, the reflection shifts to the output. The author talks a lot about how this skill fundamentally changes how they project themselves into the world. They talk heavily about confidence.
Yes. And specifically, professional confidence.
The text mentions job interviews, professional presentations, customer service conversations. Now, I don't care who you are or what your native language is, those are high-stress environments.
Absolutely.
I get nervous doing presentations in my first language.
We all do. Your palms sweat, your heart races. But add the extra layer of doing all of that in a second language. The anxiety usually skyrockets for people. But the author says something really interesting here. They say English actually empowers them and motivates them in these situations.
Which seems entirely counterintuitive to me. You would think operating in a second language would make you feel way more vulnerable, not more powerful.
Under normal circumstances, yes. But you have to think about the psychology of competence. When you walk into a high-stakes room like a major job interview, your biggest underlying fear is usually that you don't actually belong there, that you are an imposter.
Ah, the classic imposter syndrome.
Right. We all get it. But if you have mastered a global tool, if you can sit there and articulate complex, nuanced ideas in a language that isn't even your own, that is tangible, undeniable proof of your competence.
Because you aren't just lucky to be in that room.
No, you engineered your way into that room through sheer effort. You built the bridge that got you there. The author explicitly mentions that this skill opens many doors for international work and study.
So it's not just about feeling a temporary boost of confidence in the moment. It is about a long-term strategic advantage.
It is leverage, pure and simple. By viewing the language as a tool, the author has effectively expanded their potential job market from their local neighborhood or city to the entire planet.
And knowing that does wonders for your baseline confidence.
Exactly. You know that you aren't stuck in one place. You have options.
Okay, so we have established the why. Interpersonal connection, unlimited knowledge, professional confidence, and career leverage. It is a highly compelling sales pitch for learning a language. But now we really need to talk about the how, because this is where most people, myself included, usually fall off the wagon.
The method.
The method. Because the author lists the actual ways they study, and I have to say, it sounds suspiciously fun. They list reading English books, watching educational videos, and listening to podcasts.
Which I found pretty amusing. No mention of flashcards anywhere in this text. No mention of sitting at a desk memorizing verb conjugation tables until 2 in the morning.
Right, and it makes me wonder, is that actually studying? Or is the author just consuming fun content and calling it learning so they feel productive?
It sounds like slacking off, but it is actually a very sophisticated approach, whether the author consciously realizes it or not. In linguistic circles, we often refer to this as the input hypothesis. It was popularized by a linguist named Stephen Krashen.
Okay, break that down for us. What exactly is the input hypothesis?
The core idea is pretty simple but revolutionary. It argues that we don't acquire language by memorizing grammar rules and then slowly trying to apply them in real time. That process is just too slow and clunky for the human brain.
So how do we acquire it?
We acquire language by receiving comprehensible input. Basically, we just need to hear or read messages that we fundamentally understand, ideally pitched just slightly above our current skill level.
So you are absorbing the underlying patterns of the language rather than memorizing the mathematical rules of it.
Exactly that. When the author says they watch educational videos or read fiction books, they are engaging with content where the actual message is the priority.
They want to know how the murder mystery
Right,
ends.
or they want to understand the physics concept in the YouTube video. The English language is just the invisible delivery mechanism for that information.
So the brain is processing the language in the background, while the conscious mind is fully focused on the entertaining content.
Yes, and because the content is genuinely interesting to them, because they are actively choosing books and podcasts they actually like, the emotional engagement is much higher. And this does two crucial things.
What's the first one?
One, it makes the memory stickier. Human beings remember things we actually care about. And two, and this is the really critical part, it completely solves the consistency problem.
The consistency problem being the fact that studying textbooks is incredibly boring, and we all eventually quit.
Precisely. You can force yourself to do grammar drills for a month, maybe 2 months if you are incredibly disciplined. But eventually, your willpower bank runs empty. You will not force yourself to do something you hate every single day for 5 years.
That's true.
But if studying just means watching your favorite YouTuber or reading a gripping thriller novel on the train, you don't need willpower anymore. You just need curiosity.
The text actually uses the phrase improve naturally. That is exactly what they're describing. It's lifestyle integration rather than blocking out a painful study session.
It creates a beautiful, virtuous cycle. The more content you consume, the better your language skills get. The better your skills get, the more complex and interesting content you can access.
Which just makes you want to consume even more.
Exactly. It fuels itself.
However, I really don't want to paint this as a completely painless, magical process. The author is actually very honest about the friction points in this journey. They explicitly mention, and I quote, grammar rules can be challenging.
And thank goodness they admitted that, because if they had written that it was all easy and fun all the time, I wouldn't believe a single word of this essay.
Grammar is usually the exact point where the fun, intuitive method hits a brick wall. You can watch all the videos you want, but eventually you have to sit down and figure out why the sentence structure actually works the way it does.
And that is deeply frustrating.
It makes you feel stupid.
It does. It is a high cognitive load. You're trying to map an entirely new logic system onto your adult brain, and your brain naturally resists that effort. But listen to how the author frames this specific frustration. This is the key to their entire mindset.
They say, I see them as opportunities to grow and become better.
Now, I know it is very easy to roll your eyes at a sentence like that and say, oh, that's just a nice positive affirmation for a self-help poster. But psychologically speaking, this is the exact differentiator between people who actually master a difficult skill and people who just dabble and quit.
You are talking about the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset.
I am, but let's apply it specifically to the context of learning something hard. Most people instinctively interpret confusion as a failure signal.
They think, I don't understand this grammar rule, therefore I am not naturally good at languages, therefore I should just stop trying.
Right. It's the classic, I'm just not a math person, or I'm just not a language person excuse.
But the author interprets that exact same confusion as a growth signal instead.
Exactly. It is exactly like resistance training at the gym. If you lift a weight and it feels incredibly light, you aren't actually building any muscle. You're just waving your arms around.
Sure.
If the weight is heavy, if you are genuinely struggling to push it up, that physical struggle is literally the biological stimulus for muscle growth.
So the mental frustration you feel when you can't figure out the grammar rule, that frustration is the learning happening in real time.
That is the literal sensation of new neural pathways being forged in your brain. The author has essentially hacked their own emotional reaction to failure.
Wow.
Instead of feeling discouraged by the difficulty, they lean right into it because they know that difficulty is the only actual path to becoming better.
It is a really gritty, realistic way to look at it. It isn't, oh, I love grammar. It's, I accept the intense challenge of grammar because I desperately want the result on the other side.
And that specific resilience is what transforms this entire endeavor from a temporary school subject into a lifelong skill, which is the exact phrase the author uses to wrap up the piece.
Lifelong skill. That phrasing really implies there is no finish line.
There isn't one. If you treat education as a subject, you pass the final exam, you sell your heavy textbook back to the campus bookstore, and you never think about it again.
Right.
But if it is a tool for life, like learning to drive a car, or learning to cook healthy meals, or learning to manage your finances, you expect to use it forever.
Yeah.
You expect the tool to evolve alongside you.
The author connects this directly to their ultimate vision of the future. They say this skill helps them build a successful future. But reading between the lines of the text, their definition of success seems pretty holistic.
It is very holistic. It is not just, I want a high-paying international job, though, to be fair, that is clearly a part of it.
Sure.
But the success they describe also heavily includes personal growth, internal motivation, and deep human connection. It is a picture of a life that is significantly bigger, broader, and more connected than the one they would have been limited to without the language.
It goes right back to that idea of the map. Without the language, their personal map of the world is small. With the language, the map is the entire globe.
And they are the navigator. That is the true agency we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive. They aren't sitting in a classroom waiting for a teacher to guide them step by step. They have the tool in their own hands, and they are charting their own course.
So let's bring this all back to the listener. We have spent this whole time dissecting an essay about learning English. But as we said at the very start, this isn't really just about English.
No, not at all. It is fundamentally about how we approach the acquisition of any new capability.
The author found their ultimate key in a foreign language. But for the person listening to this right now, maybe they are already fluent in English, maybe they aren't. The core principle absolutely still holds up.
Absolutely. The final question I would ask you, the listener, to really mull over today is this. Look at the skills you are currently trying to learn, or maybe the ones you know you need but have been actively avoiding. Are you treating them as subjects? Are they just annoying chores on a mental to-do list that you secretly resent?
And what would actually happen if you mentally recategorize them today as tools?
Right. Let's say you are learning to code, or learning data analytics, or even just learning how to do public speaking. If you see it as a class you have to pass, you will do the bare minimum to survive it.
But if you see it as the literal key that unlocks a specific door in your life,
A promotion, entry into a brand new industry, a way to express your creative ideas to thousands of people, suddenly the daily drudgery disappears. The friction just becomes a necessary part of the building process.
the internal narrative changes from, I have to do this, to I get to do this.
And more importantly, I am building something tangible with this. That is the massive shift. The author of our source material isn't just a passive student. They are an active architect of their own future. And they happen to be using English as their foundation.
But we can all do that exact same thing with whatever skill we choose to prioritize in our own lives.
We certainly can.
That is a very powerful thought to end on. Stop studying, start building.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Thank you so much for exploring this with us today. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Always a pleasure to dive into these things.
We will catch you in the next deep dive.